a biologically synthetic android astronaut made by NASA, is launched at the same time a roving Martian patrol approaches Earth in search of women to repopulate Mars. Hijinks ensue. That's all I got, folks. It's the 1965 sci-fi monster mashup, Frankenstein meets the Space Monster. This week on Movie Bones.
We continue to hear modulated hydrogen frequency signal of 21 centimeters, Princess.
The source of the signals is the planet that we are observing on the telescanner now.
Let us move in for a closer look.
Aha! They have launched a missile attack.
Destroy the missile, Nadir.
Focus full force field at 090 degrees, range 700. And now, maximum energy.
What do we do if this guy fouls up today, Professor Steele?
General, we've checked everything out. I'm absolutely confident that nothing can go wrong.
I hope so. Now, we'll have to try it your way. We've already lost 3 boosters in a row. How are you doing, Miss Grant?
Happy Halloween to everybody out there. It's Justin and Ryan again, and this week we have a movie that is essentially both like its title and very much not like its title. So neither of us are dressed up as anything. You know, I'm not, at least. You're not dressed up as anybody, right, this year?
Dude, I'm in my comfy clothes.
Okay, so you're dressed up as Ryan. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but this year, of all the films we had in our list to do, Frankenstein Meets the Space Monster was the one that probably fit the bill the most. And the Frankenstein part I kind of get. Frankenstein accurately describes several aspects of the film. I mean, it's splicing together things that don't belong together in ways where you can really see the seams very well. Just like in that clip we just played. You know, you're jumping around and it's like 2 different movies in one way. And it's like, and then you have things later on that happen. And we'll get into all of that. But it's not I guess it's like, so what ways is it not like Frankenstein to you? I mean, we talked a little bit about that just before we started recording. Talk about that some more. Tell the audience.
For starters, like, okay, I've never read the actual Frankenstein story. It's like something that I've intend on reading. And like, I've seen some movies, and I'm not really going to compare it to movies, but I mean, I'm going to compare it to the titular character, Frankenstein. For starters, this movie does not go out of its way to explain the difference between Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster, which, here's the problem. I'm not entirely sure they care.
And I mean, there's a lot they don't care about. You can tell, I mean, in some ways.
This is a world that everything else is happening, like everything else that has happened in history has happened. The book, Frankenstein, has happened. They reference the book in this movie. Because they don't reference it a lot, but they reference one good time. And you would think they would at least go, okay, Frankenstein is not the monster. It's Frankenstein's monster. We're not going into the theme of who's actually the monster. No. The monster's name is not Frankenstein. That's the doctor's name. The robot astronaut guy who becomes Frankenstein is called Frank.
It's an on-the-nose reference, yeah.
Yeah, very on-the-nose reference. But that's, again, part of the whole, feel of actual Frankenstein is that, it's just like that line. It's that line in Jurassic Park. Our doctors, or scientists, were so preoccupied with
whether or not they could.
They never asked themselves, should they, or whether or not they should.
Right.
That should be a question that's asked here. They create Frankenstein in this movie. That's what they call it, Frankenstein anyways, or Frank. But they create him, and they're not really, I don't recall ever a moment where they're going, should we have done that?
No, and it's like, it's for purely utilitarian things. I mean, at least you could argue that in the in the essence of the Frankenstein, mythology is that it's about man's hubris in trying to create life, right? Where once there was none, now there is. And not in the sense that we all, we have families and raise kids and have life that way. That's the ordinary way you think of people giving life, but actually creating life from dead matter. And there's a kind of a visceral human kind of, this is kind of wrong in a way. It's like, it's exploring a certain kind of hubris. And there's none of that here. It's just like, this is a purely utilitarian thing. We need to have some android, to put on our rocket ship to spare humans from having to go explore themselves, I guess, to have a human stand-in do these things. Why? The necessity for this is purely both at the same time utilitarian and why at the same time. Because if you're going to just put an android in space, it's like, why bother making him look human to give interviews for reporters? Why bother with that step? Why bother?
Well, heck, I mean, like, if we wanted to take it to its, like, this movie I don't think was supposed to be a comedy by any stretch. And
well, half the cast seems to think they're in a serious sci-fi movie.
And we're going to talk about that part in a moment. To piggyback off what you're saying is like that whole why thing. Okay, then, like, dude, you made an actual working android. Why are you hiding that from the public?
I know. That's a major breakthrough right there, right?
Yeah, you made an actual working android. You shouldn't hide that from the public. Become a billionaire.
Yeah. I mean, think about today how, like, we're for a while, it's like, and it's still kind of out there. It's like there is a group of people out there who were so invested in AI, right? Trying to make, especially AI videos. And do you know the Will Smith thing where they had Will Smith eating was like a test for AI, AI intelligence, so to speak? And it's like, so Will Smith is eating. It's like, and everyone's all excited about this. And it's like, and for a moment, if you just kind of blink for a moment, it looks weird, and it was really weird. But people are excited about, look how the potential of this. And I'm looking at this really weird and off-putting. I kind of guess that if people can get excited about that, think about like an android that could actually, for at least a few minutes, fool a bunch of reporters in a room that he was actually human until he glitches, of course. And that's the clue to the audience. Hey, something's not right here. Something's off. But they had to put that in there because he's otherwise an ordinary human talking and that kind of thing. You'd think that would be the story itself, right? If you could get that far.
Yeah. Yeah. So, by the way, I have a little confession to make. So I came home late Friday, Friday before we filmed this. I'd been out at a game and I came back. So I was like, you know what? I got time. I'm going to watch it. I was feeling pretty awake. And like, I didn't even realize that I had dozed off for like maybe a minute or so. And it was during that scene where he's talking to them. So like and it wasn't very long. That's what I'm saying. It wasn't very long. So my eyes shut and then came back and I'm like, why did dude glitch? I'm trying to figure that out. And like, cause like he's all of a sudden he just stops talking and I'm like,
and it's not even just that, they actually freeze frame to make sure you. Yeah. And I did wonder if something that happened on Tubi's end is like, did Tubi glitch? Yeah, because I'm still hearing like the timer on the play clock is still going, so it's like the movie is still playing. I checked, because and it's like, but no, this is actually the thing. It's actually frozen frame because of that, and it's like, oh, but it takes several moments to pick up on it. You're still confused why you need this robot guy, but whatever, okay? They're very serious people trying to do a very serious movie. And then on the other end of the spectrum, this is where the Frankenstein, kind of analogy comes into play. It's like they're stitching together that movie with the other half of the cast, the aliens that feel like that they read the script and they would say, this is Plan 9 stuff. We're going to lean into Plan 9, That's what it is. And they butt up against each other, just like you heard in the intro, right? They just butt up against each other without any kind of transition whatsoever. And that's really something else.
It can be quite jarring because for the longest time in this movie, you kind of have two separate stories that are happening at once. There's a lot of these characters that don't interact with each other until almost the end of the movie. And that can be a problem because it's like, okay, when are we going to get to them? And you finally have that moment. And it's because and it's not, I don't want to say organic. Maybe that's not the right phrasing. It's not organic. It's definitely not organic, but it's almost like, okay, how are we going to merge these two movies? And it's like, oh, here's an idea. And that's when the characters actually start all interacting with each other.
We've often come into the problem where it feels like, oh, there's two different movies going on. We had the same problem with Cactus Flower, although it's a different expression of that. because where that one was mostly the script changing and the actors are still doing their part. I mean, the actors are still doing, they're still living in the same clothes and everything like that. It felt like two different script writers. This feels like there's just two different movies being filmed at the same time. And it's like, what can we do to put these two together at the very end?
I'm so convinced that these two movies, there were two separate movies, and they could not, they couldn't figure out how to like finish both movies. So it was eventually decided upon, let's just put them together.
Yeah. And not only that, but it's like one of the movies, you almost could say there's a third movie going on because a third of the movie feels almost like it's doing Roman Holiday. The lead scientist and his girlfriend, I guess, would-be girlfriend, who's also a scientist, and that's a trope in itself. But it's like they suddenly decide to hop in a Vespa and go around Puerto Rico,
Yeah.
And it feels and there's so much footage of that, too. It feels like I'm either in a Roman Holiday or I'm in a Vespa commercial.
Or you're in a Puerto Rico commercial.
Yes, or a travelogue for Puerto Rico. All three at the same time. And it's just thrown in there. And the music, too, it's just like the music is totally different than what you would expect for a sci-fi, horror movie. It's so many parts. It's all I can say. It's so many parts. And it's just like slam, slam, slam. This part's done, slam, back into the sci-fi part for a bit. And yeah, should we talk about let's actually introduce a fourth element, which could make up, it's like 3/4 of the movie, which is the stock footage.
Oh, man. Stock footage. Military stock footage. For the win.
Oh, man. It's like, and some of it's, I could see almost like some of this being like official NASA footage. As stock footage goes, it's a higher quality grain, I guess you could say, of the film stock. And you can see stuff like they're actually, now I have been as a child. As a child, my parents took me to Cape Canaveral in Florida. So the movie actually did bring back some memories for me of that I hadn't thought about in a very long time. But it's very high quality, detailed footage. It's almost like they got the cooperation of NASA, I think, to get some of this stuff because it's kind of a higher level of stock footage. Other stuff is kind of lesser. But as it goes, if you're going to use stock footage in your B movie, I mean, it's got it and then some. And some of it's actually kind of interesting, especially early on. They had some footage there. It's kind of interesting. But it's like 70% of the movie is like stock footage at some point.
Yeah.
It makes up its own
really
chunk of the film,
This movie is made in 1965. We're well within the Vietnam War, are we not?
Yes. The Vietnam War, the space race, all of that.
And like, I'm sitting there, as I'm watching the movie, I'm like, this has got to be Vietnam War footage.
Some of it, yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. With the helicopters, especially. Yeah. You had all the helicopters landing. Yeah.
Yeah.
This movie had to be like made with the cooperation of the U.S. Defense Department. They're calling it something else right now. I won't say what that is, but yeah.
The funny thing about that is that they use a lot of the stock footage, and then like, what was the other movie that we talked about that had a lot of stock footage in it?
Oh man, pick one. A lot of the B movies had it, but I'd have a hard time pinpointing it just based on that.
Well, anyways, I remember one movie that we watched that had stock footage. Oh, it was another monster movie. Oh, it was.
Was it the 20 Million Miles to Earth?
Maybe. It was just, I remember because it had the guy that does the claymation puppet stuff.
Oh yeah. That's Harryhausen. Yeah, that's probably it. Yeah.
There was stock footage there, and they made the stock footage actually make sense to the movie. This doesn't. Like, no. This does not really, like, the only time the stock footage actually makes sense for the movie is when they use the fighter jets to drop bombs on the spaceship.
Yeah.
Like, that's where it makes sense. But, like, you've got this, like, whole scene where you've got, like, military, people who are landing on the ground. And, like, you never see anybody in military gear except, like, our colonels and things like that. But you don't ever see them. And they're not ever actually used in that way. It's just like, oh, here's the whole entirety of the American
military
the American Army military descending upon this, this spaceship in a field. And you never see the military other than, the planes.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, the plane part, that made sense, but everything else doesn't make sense.
When you see the spaceship itself, and when they actually just focus on the spaceship as it's landed, I think it looks like one of those, it's one of those geodesic kind of half dome things. I think it looks like things I've seen on airports. Sometimes if you go around, drive around an airport, you'll see these kind of geodesic kind of forms, and they probably repurposed one of those with a ladder on the outside. It looks alien enough. We'll use that, right? But it's such a small thing, and the aliens themselves have only been sporadically threatening. They blew up a couple of rockets initially, but they don't even know that that's them initially, you know? For all they know, it's there are some women disappearing related to this object, a spacecraft. That's all they know. And they send in the Marines and in helicopters and jets. And it's like, look, it is possible for human beings to kind of overreact to things. And we still do that today. And I could name off examples of that. I mean, it's so ridiculous. It almost makes its own point. It's like, this is ridiculous. How could anyone take this seriously? And it's like, but half the cast is trying to take it seriously. It's just really, really weird.
And when we say seriously, folks, we mean seriously. Like, the acting in this movie is actually quite good.
The people who are doing the scientist shtick, it's like they're trying more than I usually see in a B movie. And everyone on the other side, on the alien side, is trying too. They're just trying really hard at different things. Like I said, and the guy, we have to talk about Dr. Nadir. Dr. Nadir is my favorite. He's my new favorite guy on these B movies.
That's what I'm talking about, man.
I wish I had a whole movie just where he's like got the most of the screen time, because he just enjoys himself so much. He's so pleased with himself, you know. It doesn't matter what he's up to. It's like, oh, he is like Dr. Evil, you know. I think of Austin Powers and Dr. Evil. Dr. Evil is probably my favorite, you know, Mike Myers creation. And here it's like Dr. Evil, but mixed kind of with like the voice of what's that Saturday Night Live, John Lovitz from like the Saturday Night Live 90s. I think it was the 90s. But he has his kind of voice, but he's so pleased with himself, and he loves what he's doing so much. It doesn't matter what he's doing. He loves what he does, and he's just kind of eating it up. I wish I had more of him, man. It's like he could be Spice in so many movies.
He does. Like, it really is. Like, I would like to know, did the guy just decide to go all in and, you know, this is my character, I'm going to play him as such?
Yeah. The guy apparently had a pretty long career as a kind of a very, very no-name kind of a career. It's one of those guys who works in acting his whole life, but never really even rises to like B tier or maybe even not even C tier. He's just kind of there. The only thing I could think of, but even into the 80s, he was doing movies like, you know, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids with Rick Moranis, you know, and that one. And he's like, he played like a bit part in that, like such a bit part. He may have had a speaking line, but he's there and gone again. But this to me is like, you know, if I imagine him as like, if you had just taken what he did in this movie and like, and just ran with that, man, what other like parallel history this guy could have had.
Like, I was looking up some stuff about this movie just a little bit ago that I didn't think about looking up until just now. The Princess Marcusin, Marilyn Hainham, worked for a certain magazine out there that, you know, we're not going to promote on this. We're not going to promote on this particular thing. Another thing, like, coming back to the whole Frankenstein's meets the space monster, overseas where this movie is distributed, it actually goes by a couple different names. One of them is Clash of the Space Monsters.
That's probably better, slightly better.
I would say it's slightly better. It would have been slightly better if, like, Frankenstein was in space.
Yeah.
And by that, I'm not saying, like, they launched him into space and that's where they come across him.
Right. If you had even just Frankenstein in space or Frankenstein, you know, space age Frankenstein, I don't know what kind of, how would you, trying to come up with a title for this movie really kind of defies ability. It really, you have to stretch your imagination to try and come up with an accurate title, because like I said, there's so many different parts of this movie, it jumps around so much. Anytime you think you've nailed it, you're like, oh yeah, but 2/3 of the rest of the movie is something completely different. Trying to describe it accurately is like, well, just toss it in the air. It's like, what, you know, roll the dice. What are you going to do? I barely touched on this before, but it's like the music feels, there was like enough pop music in this, and it's actually fairly decent. That music that we heard in the intro, it's like you have some of this James Bond kind of like jazz inspired stuff, and then you've got, you know, this more vacation inspired music in the I guess the Vespa scenes, and it's all better quality than I would say than most of these movies. I've seen a lot more B movies, so I have some authority to speak, I guess, in this. But as those things go, it's actually more than just a little decent. I could listen to some of this stuff on its own even, and it's weird to say that about a movie too. That's like, it kind of is good even if it doesn't make any sense, if that's the best way I could put it. just like everything else.
It was very 60s music,
Oh, yeah.
which, kind of harkens back to, Cactus Flower a little bit. And it kind of felt out of place, but I mean, it was like, I was like, okay, this is enjoyable.
If it's just standing on its own, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Because like with a movie like this, because of its like kind of demeanor and how it's presenting itself, you would actually think that maybe we're gonna have more like scary music, but no, we're shifting right into that 60s vibe music.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. The only thing I think is left to really want to talk about, I guess, is that, it's like, for having the title being what it is, it's like, it's only spent like 5 minutes at the end actually doing anything with it. And you don't actually see the outcome of the fight either.
No, you don't. I mean, it just kind of ends on you. Like it's, you'd have to ask this question, who did it better, The Sopranos or Frankenstein meets the Space Monster?
You have to elaborate on that because I haven't seen The Sopranos.
Most of The Sopranos episodes ends with like just all of a sudden the screen goes to black and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how the series ends. It ends on a screen goes to black ending that leaves everybody going, okay, purposely asking the question, how did it end? That's kind of what happens here. Of course, it doesn't go to black. It just goes right to the credits.
Yeah.
Like you have this scene where, I thought he was like, it looked like he lost the fight. Then some other stuff's happening. The girl escapes.
And the monster kind of just stops fighting him for a while to let him get where does he get the gun? He lets Frankenstein pick up the gun and attacks the crew.
Yeah.
Why?
And then like, I think it's kind of like implying that the place exploded. And then it just goes to credits.
And boom. And not just credits, but right from that to the credits with more Vespa action.
Yeah.
It couldn't have ended, I guess, in a more fitting way.
Which is funny because, I wonder this myself, since the credits are the way they are. I'm sitting there wondering, like, did George Lucas watch this movie and decide that that's where he got his inspiration for credits after the film is over with?
I probably not, but at least it's fun to think that he might have, and have you ever seen, just before I get off the Vespa thing, have you ever seen Luca? It's the Pixar film Luca.
I've not actually watched it yet.
It's actually a good film. I enjoyed it quite a lot with my wife, and it's like, but one of the central things about the film involves a Vespa. If you watch the film, Senior Vespa comes to mind very much. I know we're going to come down with this at least partially. This is Nuke the Fridge.
Yeah, it's absolutely Nuke the Fridge.
How often, though? How often would you want to, how much of a Nuke the Fridge is it, on the scale?
If I'm going to watch this film again, I absolutely want to watch it with a riff tracks. Like, that's where I would like to see this. And I'm sure there is one of it somewhere.
There has to be. And if there isn't, it's a crime.
Yeah, but that's where I'd watch it again. I'd watch it for the laughs. But I'm personally not sitting down and watching this movie on its own as just a fun movie ever again.
So maybe it's like a Nuke the Fridge with Bad Dates kind of a thing.
Yeah.
I could see where you're coming from on that because I am Nuke the Fridge too. I would almost want to, it's almost worth it for me to take a copy of this film and edit it down to just maybe the 30% of it, the 33% that's the best bits. Mostly just cutting out that 70% of stock footage because it does drag. It's like, okay, it's stock footage again. Okay, and not just that, it's like you feel the weight of those moments when you're watching the stock footage. So for me, it's like, if I just cut that out, I could watch this with my wife and be almost like a short on its own, kind of just like a 33%, of the length. So for that, I guess it's worth somewhere either between Bad Dates and In a Museum, because In a Museum, if it's just edited, so I'm going to say 2.5. I was like, Bad Dates is 2. Yeah, 2.5 out of 5, basically. So that's where I'm at on this.
Yeah.
So anyway, folks, that's our review of Frankenstein meets the Space Monster this week. At this time, we'd like to remind our listeners out there that if you're having a good time with Ryan and me dusting off these old movies in search of celluloid treasure, please do subscribe, comment, and of course, follow us on your podcast purveyor of choice. Tell us what you think we got wrong, of course, and clue us in on a few titles you'd like us to see do on future episodes. As long as they're available for free somewhere on the internet, most likely Tubi. We like Tubi a lot, because this adventure comes with no strings attached. And on the subject of future episodes, unfortunately, Tubi did not have this one, but we really wanted to watch it. But tell the folks what we're watching next week.
This is going to be an interesting movie. A movie that I have watched one particular scene for the longest time and have always wanted to actually sit down and watch it all the way through. I am sad that it doesn't have it, but I'm sure it's somewhere accessible.
It's on Internet Archive, at least
okay.
with weirdly Spanish subtitles, but we're gonna ignore those.
The next week's film is a Charlie Chaplin film, which I think is a first for us. Starring Charlie Chaplin, directed by Charlie Chaplin, also starring Paulette Goddard, Jack Oakey, and Henry Daniel. IMDb says Dictator and Adenoid Hinkle tries to expand his empire while poor Jewish barber tries to avoid persecution from his regime. Yes, if you can put two and two together, you know exactly what it's supposed to mirror, and it's appropriate time to mirror this as well because this movie is filmed and released in 1940. It is one of his more serious films, if I'm correct. This movie, maybe some of you already know this, is The Great Dictator.
The Great Dictator. And Henry Daniel, do you know where we've seen him before? We have seen him before on Movie Bones.
No. I know. Like, you tell me, I'm going to go, oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's, think of it as, was it The Body Snatcher?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, opposite Boris Karloff, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did a good job in there too. So yeah, looking forward to this one a lot. I haven't seen this one except for like the speech at the end. It gets floated around a lot on the internet. So I'm really interested in seeing everything in the movie, the speech. So looking forward to that. And that's all we got for this week, folks. Please do join us for The Great Dictator. And see you guys next week. And Ryan, I'll see you next week. Okay?
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, folks.
And now, maximum energy.